Welcome, everyone. So glad to have you all with us as we begin our lunch and learn for the day. So today, very excited to have this special lunch and learn talking about settler identity and education and what we need to be doing to move towards reconciliation. Very, very grateful to have Dr. Carolyn Campbell here to talk with us. You're going to get a chance to hear a little bit more about her. She's got her PhD is in social work education. She has extensive experience in a number of areas, including working with the Canadian Association of Social Work Education, looking at criteria of education, and currently does tremendous work in the area of settler identity and education with Horizons, and I will let her share a little bit more with you all. Just grateful to have you all arriving and want to invite everyone here to join with me in a land acknowledgement. So you'll see on the bottom right a link, placenames.mapdev.ca. And if you go there, you'll see this wonderful interactive map. It also even helps you know how to pronounce where you are located. And so I'd like to invite you to join with me in the chat and acknowledge the name of where you are located. So let's just take a moment to recenter ourselves as we prepare. If you have a window, you might want to look outside, taking a moment to ground ourselves in this land where we are. And I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking from Unama'ki, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, whose inherent rights were recognized in the Peace and Friendship Treaties that were signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. The treaties were later reaffirmed by Canada in Section 35 of the Constitution Act, 1982, and they remain active to this day. Let us take this time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and work. The Nova Scotia College of Social Workers commits to translating this acknowledgement into action by seeking to implement the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, especially those regarding education. We commit to doing what we can to becoming better treaty partners. We commit to learning and to unlearning. Let us take this moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all human beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. Let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. May our session today lead us to be in right relationship with this land and with one another. And when we acknowledge the land, we have to also begin to acknowledge the wisdom of this planet and align ourselves with its truths. So let us take another few moments to reflect upon what we will do, and how we will proceed in order to align ourselves with these teachings. I am delighted to invite Carolyn to now continue in this special Lunch and Learn, and grateful for all of you who've been joining us as I've been screen sharing.
Okay, thank you very much, Naj. And thank you to everyone for being here. It's a beautiful sunny day out there. If you are working, I suspect you'd be in some ways rather spending your noontime out on the land that Naz just talked about. But so I really appreciate your time. I'm just going to take a second and share my screen so I can give you a sense of who I am and what we're going to be doing today. So is that up there, Naj, the way we wanted it?
No, you are sharing your entire screen, so I would invite you to stop, or you could do that. That works too.
That works too. Okay. How would I, because now I can't see my notes very well. Sorry, folks. How would I do it otherwise? I think I have to do that, don't I? Yeah, okay. All right, I can do it without. All right, it just means I don't see you. So introductions, I'm going to do, Nash has done some introduction, but I'm just going to expand a little bit on that so you know who I am. Unfortunately, in just an hour, we don't have time to hear from everybody in terms of, but I appreciate what you're putting in the chats in terms of knowing where people are from. I just want to make sure I can see that chat. Sorry, folks, I'm not real good at this. And then we're going to do a bit of a small group discussion. You won't have a long time for this. We only have an hour or a total. Then a short presentation, and then just a bit of closing reflection. So that's the kind of the plan for today. I am doing this particular work, which we're calling settler education, through an organization called Horizons Community Development. Horizons is a small Nova Scotia company that does a variety of things in terms of a lot of program evaluation, program development, and so on. And when I retired from my work at the School of Social Work at Dalhousie, I was really interested in doing some of this settler education work and basically connect it with Horizons. And together we developed some settler education initiatives. So what you're seeing here is just the front page of Horizons website. And if you were to click on the settler education, part of what you would see is what we have developed. So we've kind of taken advantage of Justice Murray Sinclair's quote, where he says, "We have shown you the mountain, we call upon you to do the climbing." And we've developed a variety of options for professional development and training around settler education. So the first level is what we call preparing to climb. And the very first part in that is If It Feels Good, It's Not Reconciliation, which is a video done in 2019 by Dr. Pam Palmater. And I will put the link for that in the chat when you're off in your small groups, because I would highly recommend that people watch that. It's a really good introduction to what we're doing here. The second very short session we do is called Settler Identity and Settler Education, and that's what we're doing today. And then the third short session is called Foundational Concepts and Myths, which is what we're doing as a Lunch and Learn in 2 weeks from now. So I'm hoping that if you enjoyed today, that some of you might come and join that. Horizon also does what we call shorter hikes, which are usually 3 or 4 hour workshops that explore some of the Euro-Western worldview, that explores some of the disturbing foundations of Canada, and then talks about settler responsibility. So each of those are 3 to 4 hours long, depending upon the size of the group. And then the thing we've been doing the most is what we call Stepping Up, a learning journey for settler Canadians. And that's a long course. When we do it face-to-face, which we started in 2017, it's 8 weeks at 2 hours a night. 2 hours once a week that people continue to commit to doing. But then also, since the pandemic, we translated that into an online delivery as well. And we've done that 3 times now. So there's basically a pre-designed study guide that participants in the course take themselves through on a weekly basis. And once a week, we have a reflective kind of Zoom where we come together. Naj has done that class with us. So if you want to learn more about that, I'm sure she'd be able to share that with you. So what we're doing today is just a very tiny piece of the work that Horizons does. And again, if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go onto their website and find out more. So again, if we were face-to-face or had more time, I would ask us to develop some learning agreements together. So in the meantime, I'm just going to throw out some ideas that I think are important, which is that we hold confidentiality. That doesn't mean that you can't talk about what you learn here, but that we hold confidentiality in terms of anything personal that people might share. Be present and mindful, and Naj's introduction, inviting us to sort of ground ourselves where we are, is helpful in that way. Be open and curious and show up with honesty and integrity. Suspend judgment. We may talk about some things that don't sit that well with you. Let's see how it goes. Share our experience. Lean into the discomfort and support each other. Show compassion and respect for self and others. And be accountable for our personal and each other's well-being. So that's sort of suggestions for guidelines. So I'm going to, as soon as I finish this introduction here, I'm going to get Naj to send you into groups of 3, and you'll have, how are you for time? Yeah, you'll have about 15 minutes, not quite 15 minutes, to just discuss the following with each other. What does the term settler mean to you? And what thoughts and feelings does the word arouse? So I'm going to ask you to put just a few things in the chat when you come back, but again, keep it brief. So this is just to kind of prime the pump, get you talking among yourselves. So what does the term settler mean to you? Maybe you don't like it. Maybe you think it's a good one. What thoughts and feelings does the word arouse? And we'll be talking about that more during the presentation. So Naj, maybe I'll get you to send people off into groups of 3, please.
Absolutely. Welcome back, everyone. Glad to have you all joining. I'm going to put the link to Pam Palmatar's video that was shared right before we went into break so that you all can have it. And glad to have you all here. Sorry for those of you who had technical glitches, but we're back, so glad to have you all here now.
Okay, so unfortunately, I can't see the chat, but I'm just going to ask people to write just a few things about what came up in terms of what does the term settler mean to you and what thoughts and feelings does the word arouse. And then I'm going to go through how we understand it from Horizons and the work we've been doing, and then we'll have a little bit of a chance to compare those things, okay?
So feel free to put in the chat if there are any questions or comments. I will say it out loud, but if not, just so that we can all be in conversation together to hear a little bit about our reflections on the word settler.
So settler is certainly a contested term. There's no question about that. It's interesting. I was just in some other work that I was doing with Horizons. We just got an email from someone saying, please take me off your list because I find the word settler to be very offensive. So we'll have a chance to explore that a little bit. But this quote kind of captures why we are embracing the word settler. And it's from Lowen and Barker, a really good book in 2015. And it says, we hope to invite others into conversations by making ourselves visible, by saying settler, settler Canadians, and settler people. We see the impacts that speaking this word can bring, sometimes frightening, sometimes difficult, and sometimes very positive. And we believe it is worth the risk of engaging on those terms. We say settler because it is a place from which we can determine how we live on these lands. We say settler to signal that we're ready to do the work. We say settler because we believe ethical and exciting decolonial futures are possible. We say settler because we have seen the identification shape how people feel about themselves and their belonging, and how it has been the start of decolonization, awareness, and action. We say settler because it is who we are. We say settler because it is not everything we could be. So that's a quote that, as I said, really kind of captures for us what we think about settler as a
And
word.
I'm going to just say, so reading some of the chat, there's some brave sharing around conflict around the term, that the term seems to imply that someone moves into a place that is free and available. A lot of grief around the term, discussing whether it's a historical name to those who came. Now, is it a thoughtful component descriptor? Is it actionable, performative? Lots of good questions around it.
Great. All right, so let's take that apart a little further. So, okay, sorry, I'm going to go back a bit. So you've raised some of the things that I was going to say, that it is contested. Some people believe that it's, it's not universal. So, for example, the experience of Black settlers to the country is very different than those of us that came from European stock. Were people settled by choice or by force? Some people believe that the term's much too gentle, that occupier or invader would be a better term. We've chosen to use the word basically because of what's expressed in this quote. When we first started doing this work, we were using the term non-Indigenous, but we felt that that defined us by what we are not as opposed to what we are. But language changes. No language is perfect. And what I apologize for not recognizing at the very beginning is that all of us that are in this group may relate to this in very different ways. Some people may be Indigenous and have different feelings about the concept of settler. Even among us as settlers, we have different reactions to it. So it's exciting to get that feedback, Nash, that some of those questions are coming up. Some of those issues are coming up. Personally, I do introduce myself as a settler, and several realities come with that to embracing a settler identity. The first is the reality that I live on stolen land. I'm not going to take a lot of time to go into my own background, but the tombstones that you'll see there our family for, I guess, 6 or 7 generations back from the Isle of Call, which is one of the inner Hebridean islands in Scotland. And that's my paternal ancestry. People came from Scotland and were, quote unquote, given land in Cape Breton. But that land certainly would have been land that was originally Mi'kmaq territory. It still is Mi'kmaq territory. So that's, for me, when I think about what does it mean to be a settler, that's the first reality that comes along. The second reality is that I was born into, raised into, and live in a country that is designed and based on a Euro-Western worldview and the assumptions of a Euro-Western worldview. And again, in the full course, we explore this in much more detail. But assumptions are taken for granted beliefs about the world and our place within it. They seem so obvious to us as to not to need to be stated explicitly. Assumptions give meaning and purpose to who we are and what we do. And in many ways, we are our assumptions. So from a Euro-Western worldview, we have particular assumptions about place of humans in the world. We have assumptions about humans' relationships to other sentient beings. We have assumptions about time and about what's animate and not animate, what's alive and what isn't. We carry a lot of assumptions about gender, about how you know what is true, and about what is sacred. So exploring all of those assumptions and understanding who we are, those of us who come from a Euro-Western worldview, it's, I think, too easy to jump to trying to say, okay, well, we're going to try and understand Indigenous culture. One of the principles of settler education is that we need to understand our own first. So that's the second reality. The third reality is that assumptions are embedded in the language that we speak. I was raised in the English language, and most of Canada is structured around the realities of the English language. And language is the unique reflection and expression of how cultures structure, give meaning to, and interact with the world. So it's very interesting to dig a bit deeper and see what are the assumptions about language that's hidden within the English language. Oh shoot, his name's gone now. It'll come to me, I'm sorry. Thompson, no, not him. Anyway, did a really good idea show on how different languages approach the world in very, very different ways. And that was really interesting. The way we make meaning of the world comes through our language. And Mi'kmaq, for example, makes very different meanings than the English language does. The fourth reality is that I have much to learn and perhaps even unlearn. So I must actively educate myself about what it means to be a settler and what I do and do not know about myself, my communities, and my country. I think lots of times we don't know what it is that we don't know. So I'm just going to stop the share again for a second so that I can look at the chat and just respond. And I guess my question for people would be those realities of stolen land, Euro-Western worldview, English language, and that we have much to learn, do they in any way reflect what you spoke about in your small groups? So I'm going to just stop the share for a minute. So I can look at the chat, and you talked about brave people. I invite anyone to unmute. Can people unmute themselves, Naj?
They can, you can unmute yourself, raise your hand, or unmute, and I'll call on you.
Yeah, please. So if people want, I'm just going to spend a minute scanning the chat, but please jump in. Did what I bring up reflect your conversation at all?
You know what, to make this a little more user-friendly, I'm going to pause the recording.
Okay. Okay, share screen again. So these realities bring us to the concept then of settler education. Why settler education? And one of the things that Pompometer says in her is, we can't have the conversation if I need to teach, I being her. So that's very much the philosophy of settler education. Some of the principles that we work with is that truth and justice must precede reconciliation, that it's really easy to jump to the feel-good part without doing the truth part. That we as non-Indigenous people, we must do our own work. We cannot continually rely on Indigenous people to teach us because, as Pam said, we can't have the conversation if they're teaching all the time. We need to know ourselves to turn the gaze inward, and that some of the foundational truths of the Canadian state are not immediately evident to or known by settlers. So that's a principle. Another belief is that the knowledges and processes embedded in settler education are valuable prerequisites to further learning. So I know some of the reason that we entered into the settler education work was in response to the Canada 150 celebrations that happened, what were they now? Probably almost 10 years ago. And if you looked at the advice that we were given to be conscious of the fact of Canada's colonization, I think, for example, some of the advice that came from the Council of Canadians said, well, you know, read Indigenous literature, go to a powwow, reach out and make some Indigenous friends, and so on. And those are good things to do, but the principles behind settler education is that we need to turn our gaze inward first and know what assumptions it is that we are bringing to those encounters. Because until we know that, the possibility of doing more harm still exists. So settler education is contested. Not by any means does everyone agree that this is a good idea. I've had both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people say that this is not the way to go, that we don't need to be working in isolation and parallel, we need to be working together. Settler education is designed to meet the learning needs of settler Canadians and to give a space to ask questions and to explore ideas without inflicting more harm on Indigenous people. It's a space to learn more about ourselves and our country. It's a space to learn to recognize how Euro-Western values and beliefs have resulted in harm. It's a space for us to discover the stories that have arisen to deny this harm and explore more truthful stories, because there are a lot of those. It's a place to practice having the difficult conversations. And it's a place to support each other in taking meaningful personal or professional action. Settler education is not focused on Indigenous beliefs, history, knowledge, culture, or practices. And that's one of the things that I always say, but particularly in the more lengthy courses, is that if anyone who is participating feels that I or we are stepping over that line, then we need to be called on that, and we need to be called on that very, very significantly. Settler education is focused on Euro-Western assumptions, values, belief, history, culture, and practices. Another term for all of that is our worldview. So, for example, there are some very specific assumptions about land and the purpose of land and who owns land and when is land valuable that comes from the Euro-Western worldview that was brought into the foundation of Canada. That's important to understand. Settler education is unsettling. We've already seen that. One of the first books I read around this is called Unsettling the Settler Within. And the title of Pam Palmater's talk is If It Feels Good, It's Not Reconciliation. So yes, it's unsettling. It hopefully provides us the knowledge, information, and self-awareness that might help us have the difficult conversations that Palmater refers to. So again, I'm going to stop screen share and open we do have time. See if there's any new comments, 2 new messages, and if anyone wants to respond to any of that. Did you have a preconception, a pre-idea of what settler education was? Does what I went over reflect that or not? Let's see if there's anybody wanting to say anything. Okay.
So you will need to share your screen.
Yeah.
There you go.
So we've talked about the fact that a lot of what settler education is learning and unlearning. So I'm going to do a quick reflection. Again, if we were together in a circle, I'd put us off in pairs or triads to do this, but this is going to be an individual reflection. I want each of you to think about the 21 things that are listed on this slide and answer the questions. Have you heard of this concept, this term, this policy? And if so, how well could you explain it to others? All right, so and then I'm going to ask you to post 2 numbers in the chat. Well, let's just do the first one. Have you heard of this concept? So there's 21. So if you've heard of 5 of them, you're going to post 5 in the chat. If you've heard of 19 of them, you're going to put 19 in the chat. All right, so just take a moment, and I'm going to leave it up and for like 3 minutes, and then I'll close the screen and look at what numbers are in the chat.
Interested in also, as you're reflecting on this, since we look at the different stuff, to what extent would you say this might be a good, you can just get back to me later, a good assessment strategy, like we're looking at self-assessments for professional development, as I'm looking at the wide discrepancy in responses. I'm thinking this would be good.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the share in another 30 seconds. Yeah, so there is quite a discrepancy. 9, 19, 12, 9, 11, 16, 8, 6. Some of those are higher than I've seen before, 6, 7, 15. So I put that up, some concepts more than others. I put that up because basically the stance that we've been taking from Horizons is that if people really want to enter into decolonizing work or into meaningful relationship with Indigenous people, this is essential knowledge. Those 21 and a heck of a lot more, but those 21 things are pretty essential knowledge. And we'll be talking a bit more in the next session, if you choose to come, about why it is we don't know those things, why that is so central to what Canada is as a state, but why it is that so many of us don't know anything about it. So it's we have 4 minutes left, so that's what I have to offer for folks today. I hope it's useful. Any feedback is welcome, or any other, either in the chat or in person.
So thank you so very much, and grateful to have you here, and grateful to have the opportunity to begin this dialogue. Our next session will be in 2 weeks, and we look forward to continuing to invite people to dialogue and us in this learning journey, unlearning journey together. So,
and Naja, I'd also appreciate if people can take just a minute in the chat. Any comments about structure? Was there enough back and forth, or too much, or that's helpful in terms of planning next time as well.
So thank you. Let me stop recording. So grateful